Welcome to Cure America. I am Donald Eason, the president of the Center for Urban Renewal and Education, and we are excited to talk to you this morning. We have a extremely excellent guest that I've been looking forward to having a conversation with. It is Corey DeAngelis. And then let me tell you a little bit about Corey before we start our conversation. Corey DeAngelis is a leading advocate for school choice and parental rights in education, often called the school choice evangelist. Is that right, Corey? The school choice evangelist. All right. He's based in San Antonio, Texas. He's a prominent voice in conservative media, appearing on Fox News, Newsmax, and in the Wall Street Journal. Corey has a PhD in educational policy from the University of Arkansas. His influence on school choice expands nationwide through his research and policy work and public engagement. His research has been cited over 1,400 times on Google Scholar shows School Choice Saver Money. And I'm gonna let you tell me a little bit more about that. Over 1,400 times. That's amazing. So welcome, Corey. We're so excited to have you. Should I call you Dr. DeAngelis or Corey?
You can just call me Corey. You can call me doctor if you want, but I'm not a real doctor. I'm more like a Jill Biden doctor. I can't help you with medical stuff, but I could help with math problems every once in a while.
Okay, well, Corey, welcome to Cure America. And we want to talk about your book, The Parent Revolution, and what's going on in our school system and why school choice is so critically important for our students as well as our parents. So I'll let you kick it off. Tell me a little bit about yourself and about your book that the audience may need to understand a little bit more.
Yeah, I started looking into school choice as a researcher at the University of Arkansas, and my first study looked at the Milwaukee private school choice program that started in 1990. And my research team and I found that school choice was associated with a reduction in crime, which is a very important long-term outcome. We followed students until they were 20 to 30 years of age and found that, lo and behold, you get access to a better education, you get a scholarship to go to a private school, you're more likely to prosper later on in life and less likely to be involved in the criminal justice system. And with my book, The Parent Revolution, I talk about a lot of the recent victories for school choice, allowing the money to follow the child to the school that best meets your needs and aligns with your values. And a lot of families woke up post-COVID when the unions fought to keep the schools closed. Conservative parents in particular, a lot of independents as well, said, you know what, the schools aren't really focused on math, reading, and writing anymore. They're focused on gender ideology, divisive Marxist, critical pedagogy, and critical race theory. And so families said no more. They tried to push back at the school board meetings, and that didn't really work out all that well because the school boards didn't want to listen to them. They cut off their mics. They labeled them as domestic terrorists in some cases. The FBI under Biden actually created a threat tag specifically for parents protesting at school board meetings. So parents said, you know what, there's another lever here. There's a better way to force accountability of the public schools, and that is to allow me to take my money somewhere else, just like we do with any other industry. That competition forces change. It gets the school boards to say, hey, maybe we should treat these people like customers as opposed to our enemies, and maybe we should listen to them as partners in the relationship. It's their kids after all. And so now we've had 17 states pass universal school choice in the past 4 years. And I'd like to thank people like Randi Weingarten, the head of the unions, for closing the schools, holding kids' education hostage, but then unintentionally stepping on a rake, showing parents the rot in the school system that has gotten so many people mobilized for change.
Well, let me ask you, and you mentioned about partnering with the schools. I always looked at schools, because I'm a pastor, and I always looked at, the Bible says, train up your child in the way they should go, and when they're old, they shall not depart from it. And it's specifically talking to parents. So I've always looked at parents as the number one teacher of their students and the school system being their partner. And with school choice, because if you have a partner or you have someone that's working with you or for you, if they don't work out, you fire them, right? You don't, because they're not in charge of the students, the parents are. And so with that in mind, and you said 17 states have adopted the school choice. Are parents given in these 17 states, are they given them more latitude to basically guide the education of their student? And how is the NEA, you mentioned Randi Weingarten, how are they dealing with that?
They're not. They're very unhappy about it. And you look at the NEA, they've almost quadrupled down on their anti-parent rhetoric. This past year, at their annual convention in Portland, Oregon, of all places, the NEA, which happens to be the largest teachers union in the country, the largest labor union in the country, they passed a resolution to call Donald Trump a fascist. I mean, that has nothing to do with education. All of their resolutions they read more like a declaration of war on the Trump administration than anything else. In fact, in 2019, they failed to pass a policy that would have realigned their union to being about student learning, to being about, focusing on math, reading, and writing. They shot down that resolution, but then this year passed a whole slew of them. That another one called any move to abolish the Department of Education and return education to the states. They said that was racist in a resolution, which just makes zero sense to me, especially since student achievement gaps have only increased over time after the implementation of the Department of Education. It hasn't actually lived up to its mission of improving outcomes for all kids. It's just thrown more money at the problem on what useless bureaucrats pushing paper thousands of miles away in Washington, D.C. So the unions aren't happy about it. They also passed a resolution to try to get around a recent Supreme Court decision from this year out of Montgomery County, Maryland, actually, called Mahmoud v. Taylor, which allows parents to opt their kids out of gender ideology instruction. Instead of listening to that pillar of democracy, the Supreme Court, what did the unions do? They said, no, we're going to spend over $200,000 that they allocated to train teachers on how to get around that Supreme Court decision and to try to still inject their politics in the form of gender ideology into the classroom. And so school choice really does put parents in the driver's seat. It allows families to direct the upbringing of their children. And look, Vodi Bakum, a legend, said it best. We cannot continue to send our children to Caesar for their education and be surprised when they come home as Romans. So there's been this new renaissance, this revolution of parents waking up and saying, hey, I thought that I could trust you with my kids before, but I'm going to pay more attention than I ever have before. We saw this with the 2021 gubernatorial election in Virginia when Terry McAuliffe, the Democrat, said, I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach. It was a bold strategy, Cotton. It didn't work out for him. And Glenn Youngkin won on the issue of parental rights. So parents have power. They can beat the union at their own game, but it depends on them locking arms and fighting for their kids.
And what's amazing, and you're exactly right, parents have to continue to mobilize and fight for their kids. And in the Maryland case that you mentioned that went all the way to the Supreme Court, what I found amazing about that case is that one of the reasons it went to the Supreme Court and they were fighting so hard to not give parents the choice to opt out is because they said if parents were given the choice to opt out, nobody would be in the classes.
Well, maybe stop pushing that stuff and to make parents upset, right? I mean,
right, exactly.
They're making our point for us.
Exactly. If parents are telling you we don't want this education for our children, but you're going to fight to try to force them to get it. So that brings us to your book, The Parent Revolution. The Parent Revolution. And you mentioned earlier, really during the COVID, when they locked the schools down, parents could see online what their children were being taught, and they woke up. I like to say you woke up some mama bears.
That's right. I mean, you don't poke the mama bears and expect them not to retaliate. It's called The Parent Revolution. It was endorsed by Donald Trump, Pete Hegseth, Vivek Ramaswamy, and others. And it became a USA Today bestseller. And I will say, Randi Weingarten, the head of the union, retaliated this year, came out with her own book, and the cover is exactly like mine. But her book that she's hawking right now on her book tour basically calls conservatives fascists, which is horrible timing for her to do this right after the political assassination of Charlie Kirk very recently, right before she released her book. And she quadrupled down. She went on MSNBC and said that basically compared America to Nazi occupied Norway. She said that she wears a paperclip, she told the MSNBC host, because teachers during Nazi occupation in Norway used to wear paperclips in defiance to the Nazi regime. So she's basically comparing the Trump administration to literally Hitler, which at a time we're supposed to be turning down the temperature. You have the leader of the union that's supposed to represent educators, which controls the school system for about 50 million kids across America. You have them just continuing to divide this nation, trying to rip our social fabric apart, and they're trying to use the government school system to do so. Randi Weingarten should resign in disgrace. She doesn't represent everyday educators. I mean, if you look at the latest survey that I saw was by Education Week, it found that only 41% of educators actually identify as Democrats. Most of them are actually independents or even conservatives. And so if you're a teacher and you don't like what this person is doing by going on her with her megaphone, basically embarrassing the profession nationwide, teachers need to opt out, because there was another Supreme Court decision called the DeAngelis decision in 2018. Teachers can no longer be compelled to pay dues to people like Randi Weingarten, who make over $500,000 a year, who really just put all that money towards their political pet projects. It usually goes to Democrat campaign coffers. There's alternatives like the Teacher Freedom Alliance, where they're covering your personal liability insurance costs. So teachers can keep more of their hard-earned money in their pockets, stop funneling it to political purposes, because I think it's true that most teachers get into this profession not to brainwash kids, not to push a far left agenda, but to just do their jobs, right? But you have the leadership with people like Becky Pringle, Randi Weingarten, who are just putting their thumbs on the scale. And at one point, Randi held a position at the Democrat National Committee for over 26 years. She just left this year. And Becky Pringle still has her at-large position at the DNC. It's gotten so political that I think the NEA should lose their federal charter. They're the only union that has one. They've had one for over 100 years, but they've strayed so far from their original mission. They're not an educational organization. They're an advocacy arm of the Democrat Party, and a lot of teachers are waking up to that, and parents are as well.
Well, you said something earlier about them calling the Trump administration fascist and trying to compare it to Hitler. So I have a question, and from your research, if in my understanding, I've read a little bit about that era of history and what the Nazi regime had done as it relates to schools and taking over the schools and all of that. It seems to me the ones that want to take over the schools are the NEA, because the Trump administration is trying to promote education choice and school choice. I don't believe Hitler was giving school choice.
You're exactly right. I mean, if anything, if they want to play that game and start talking about this rhetoric, it's projection on their part. It's the complete opposite of their claims. Hitler's Nazi regime outlawed homeschooling altogether in 1938. And so that's the opposite of school choice. People have seen that authoritarians throughout history have wanted to centralize control of the schools so that parents can't teach alternative values to the authoritarian regime. I mean, you saw this there's a quote attributed to Lenin saying that if you give us your child for 4 years, they'll forever be a Bolshevik. And so brainwashing requires this centralized control. And I'm not saying with school choice that all public schools are bad, that all union officials are bad. There's some good ones, and you should still have the opportunity to go to that school as well. And we found in places like Florida, they've been doing the school choice thing for over 2 decades now. They've seen their public schools go from the bottom of the list on the nation's report card to the top of the pack, the top handful of states, even after adjusting for differences in student demographics across states. Florida's started from the bottom. Now they're here after they've passed school choice policies. Why? Because competition is a rising tide that lifts all boats.
Absolutely.
The public schools do better after they have to up their game in response to the freedom of parents to go somewhere else, because it's almost counterintuitive. When you have the freedom to go somewhere else, it almost reduces the likelihood that you'll need to use that option, because then the public schools will say, hey, I'll actually listen to you. I won't force you out of here, and we can work together instead of you having to leave and go somewhere else.
And that goes to something else you mentioned earlier about 1938 when the Nazi regime outlawed homeschooling. And so I asked this question, how does the NEA feel about homeschooling?
They don't like it. I mean, I think I just uncovered their 400-page handbook that was online until I put it on X, and then they scrubbed it from the internet. At one point, it was removed from the Internet Archive until I called it out. Then the Internet Archive DM'd me direct messaged me on X and said, that must have been a fluke. And then they put it back onto the Internet Archive. But there was 434 pages of their handbook. It had nothing to do with educational priorities. And this was from the largest teacher union in the country. And it had all this stuff to do with white supremacy culture being taught in schools. They had a section on homeschooling, basically saying that, they're not in favor of homeschooling because in their words, they said something along the lines that, not all homeschoolers do it right. They might not adequately educate their kids. And it's like, I mean, don't throw stones if you live in a glass house. If you look at places like Chicago, they have 55 public schools with 0 kids proficient in math, not a single kid in 55 Chicago public schools proficient in math. They spend about $30,000 a year. But what do the unions say? Well, if you give us 40 or 50 or 60,000 a year, maybe we promise we'll do a better job next time. We've seen that before. We've seen that movie before. It's the definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over again, throwing more money at the problem, expecting different results. Nothing's going to change unless the incentives change. And the way you do that is you couple those reforms with choice, allowing parents to have bottom-up accountability for the school system. That's the only way the system will start to focus on the needs of kids and families as opposed to the other way around.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm going to give something that happened in my life. So I have 3 children, and to go to just the importance of the parents' involvement in the schools, right? One of my children, I was working a lot. They started their 9th grade high school career, I'll call it, and I hadn't had a chance to see their schedule as it would be. And before I said that, I don't have anything against public schools per se. Nothing is perfect. We just want what's best for our children. We want every parent should be able to say what's best for their child. And so one of my children started 9th grade. I think it was probably a week later, a week and a half, I had a chance to really look at her schedule, and I saw some things on there, and she looked at me, and I looked at her, and she kind of laughed because she was like, this is not going to fly, right? And so I went to speak to the counselor, and the counselor was defensive initially, and I said, I'm just here to talk about my child. I know you have 400, and I just have this one, so if we can talk about this one. And I showed her the schedule. I said, I just need you to change her schedule to A, B, C, and D. And she said, well, if I change her schedule to A, B, C, and D, she's going to be behind because school has been in for a week or a week and a half. I said, that's okay. She'll catch up. I'd rather her catch up now and know that high school is not going to be this easy. This right here is way too easy. And I'm saying this because your book, The Parent Revolution, I'm looking at what my child is bringing home in the 9th grade, and I know where she needs to be when she graduates. But what ended up happening, and this is where parents, our involvement makes so much of a difference. After that first semester, she caught up. She had her next semester of classes, and her counselor said, take this home to your father and see if he's okay with it, right? And so what you're doing is amazing because it's helping parents wake up. We're showing the difference that it makes when parents wake up. You said it's 17 states that have implemented school choice. Is there something special about those states where they were able to get it across the line and the other states are still struggling to get there?
Yeah, parents locked arms and made their voices heard at the ballot box. And so, the parents can beat the unions at their own game. Basically, the only special interest in the education sector were the teachers unions for a long time. But post-COVID, parents mobilized like we never saw before. I mean, if you think about it, when the Biden administration got that letter from the School Boards Association to label parents as quote unquote domestic terrorists, what happened? 26 states left the School Boards Association, either pulled their funding or stopped their membership or both. And that just goes to show you, and that happened in a few months' time. So
Wow.
they play stupid games, they win stupid prizes, but it's not because parents sat on the couch and said, well, we don't really care if you label us as terrorists. It's because parents got their megaphones out, they locked arms and said, no way, this is a step too far. And we're going to make sure we're going to call our elected officials. We're going to send mass email campaigns. And so the pressure works when it comes from the side of parental rights too, not just when it comes from the union side. And the 17 states that went all in on school choice, they happen to be states that aren't controlled by politicians who are bought and paid for by the teachers union. And that's school choice should be a bipartisan issue. I mean, if you poll voters time and time again, you have a majority of Republicans, Democrats, independents, in most cases, a supermajority support among all of those groups. It crosses party lines because you're right, parents just want the best education for their own kids. And if that's the public school, fine, that you should be able to choose that. But if not, if you're getting bullied each day, if your kid is going and learning about things that are in direct conflict with your religious beliefs at home, and it's working against everything that you're trying to teach your child at home, because parents are the first and foremost educators for their own children, you need to be able to have an escape valve just in case. And school choice provides that. The problem is you have the teachers union is basically a money laundering operation at this point for the Democrat Party. And you look at Randi Weingarten's union, for example, the American Federation of Teachers. You can look it up on Open Secrets. Last election cycle, 99.97% of the campaign contributions from Randi Weingarten's union went to the Democrats. And if you look at reporting from the Freedom Foundation, less than 10% of union member dues from the NEA, the National Education Association, went towards representing teachers. Most of it went towards political projects. And so I think a lot of teachers don't even know this. Most teachers, they go there, they do their job. They think they need to sign up for the union because they're going to protect them in the case of a lawsuit, which now the Teacher Freedom Alliance is providing that for free. Why would you give your money to people like Randi Weingarten anymore is beyond me. I think most teachers just don't know because they're so busy with their class of 30 or 40 kids. They're trying to focus on grading papers, making the lesson plan. And so I think it's up to people like myself and others to inform teachers, but also inform parents that they have more choice in these states. So it happens to be Republican-led states that have passed school choice right now, but that's not because Democrat parents don't support choice. They overwhelmingly use these programs when given the opportunity. And I'll give one example from Florida. In 2018, after Ron DeSantis won his first governor's race, it was a close one. The Wall Street Journal the next day had a headline that said, "School choice moms tip the governor's race in Florida." And they were reporting on exit polling from CNN that found that Black moms came out in support of DeSantis much higher than the expected levels. And that was because his opponent, Andrew Gillum, he came out against the school choice program that was already serving over 100,000 kids at the time, disproportionately non-white kids, lower income kids. And those families, I believe, might have disagreed with DeSantis on a lot of other issues, but they saw that this was so important for their kid to have a better future, a better educational opportunity than the school that they were assigned to. And so they went out and saved their kids' futures by voting to keep their kids' private school choice scholarships. And so I think the Democrats at some point, the elected officials at least, are going to have to come along on this issue because the teachers unions aren't the only game in town anymore. There's a new sheriff in town. They're called parents. And they're beating them at their own game.
One final question as we end this segment, and I don't know if this was in your research or not. Is there one point or several points where we can see, based on what parents want, because I know I read a book by Thomas Sowell, and it was called Charter Schools and Their Enemies, and it's over. Is it back?
I've got it. It's one of these. It's one of these.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have Thomas Sowell's book. It's a great
So
one.
you already know the statistic. One of those statistics is over 1 million kids, or close to 1 million kids on waiting lists. So do you know where or when this possible disconnect happened between the Democratic Party and the constituents or the citizenry that they're serving, because their citizenry wants school choice, but they're not giving it to them, as if that's not something they're interested in.
Yeah, Thomas Sowell's correct. I mean, that is the best, kind of measure of success of school choice. Do people want it when they're given the opportunity? So he did cite, 1 million kids on charter school wait lists across the country. There's a documentary that came out a couple decades ago called Waiting for Superman, showing families that if they lose that lottery, I mean, this is their opportunity to get their kids out of poverty. The families are literally crying because they're going to have to go back into the school that there was gang activity or drugs, or the kid was getting bullied every day, or maybe there just wasn't a great educational environment there for whatever reason in the school. The parents want these options. And charter schools, it's not a money issue. They get about 80% of the funding per student as the assigned government-run schools. So they're doing more with less. They have parents on wait lists all across the country. In Arizona, when they passed their school choice bill in 2022, they actually broke the government website. So many parents flooded the application system. There was an error message that they were just overwhelmed, and it crashed for a day or two. And now they went from 10,000 families using scholarships in 2021 to now about 100,000 families using school choice scholarships in Arizona today, which I believe is like 6 or 7 or 8% of their school-age population. So it's a huge shift. There's also been about 1 million families, 1 million kids who have left the government-run school system since 2019. So parents are already voting with their feet. And I think, I don't know exactly when this shift happened. This most recent shift happened because of COVID and the unions overplaying their hand by closing the schools. But the unions have, given all of their contributions to the Democrats for a long time. If you look at Randi's union, Open Secrets goes back to about 1990. So for about 35 years, for which we have data, over 97% of the contributions from the teachers union, Randi's union, went to the Democrat candidates every single 2-year election cycle. And so, and then the Department of Education started in 1979. So things only got worse at that point, right, where it was created as a political payoff by Jimmy Carter to the teachers union. He wanted their endorsement. He felt like it was super important. The NEA wanted that department so they'd have one place to lobby so they can control the rest of the states, whether they're a red state or a blue state. They could use the Department of Education, one place to do it. And it was successful. I mean, they've used this kind of tactic during COVID too. They lobbied the CDC to close the schools. A lot of people don't remember that, but we had Freedom of Information Act requests showing that the unions were explicitly lobbying the AFT and the NEA, what was supposed to be a scientific institution, on their guidelines for reopening schools. They kept the schools closed as long as possible because they knew at the bargaining table, if they could use that as a bargaining chip, they could get more money from the taxpayers. And they got $190 billion in so-called COVID relief. But something that you brought up earlier, wow. I mean, authoritarians liked centralized control. So do the unions. It allows them to have more influence on all of America. And that's, that's not a good thing if you want our country to go back to our roots, away from socialist drift. The unions have kind of taken over American culture by using the school system. I mean, it's hard to fight with that. And they know it. They know if they can control the minds of 50 million kids for 13 years of their lives for 7 hours a day, I mean, people who want to return to normalcy and away from insanity, you can't win this war just by having more children. That obviously helps. But when they are molding future generations, it's the way that we save our country. We got to strike at the root, reclaim the schools, and put parents in charge ultimately. They're the ones who should decide.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, we're going to continue this discussion because this is fascinating, and you left off at exactly the point I want to pick up at on our next segment, is how we actually save our country and how education is so important in that process. So you've been here with us on Cure America. I'm here with Corey DeAngelis, and we're going to continue our discussion after this break. Welcome back to Cure America. Again, I'm Donald Eason, your host, the president of the Center for Urban Renewal and Education, and we are here with our honored guest. I'm honored to have him as a guest, Corey DeAngelis, and he wrote a book called The Parent Revolution. We've been discussing some of the parent revolution, and we want to continue with the last comment that Corey made in regards to education and really our country. What's been going on really since 1979, when the National Education Association started 100 years ago, but in 1979 it started the teachers' unions. No, that's not what I want to say. I know I was educated before 1979, and so in 1979, the National Education Association is what was started by Jimmy Carter. And schools have really gone downhill since then. And the question I have is, when we look at education and our country and improving a lot of areas of our country, because before 1979, education was really at the state level. And I thought that's where it should stay, because Michigan has its needs, Arizona has their needs, California has their needs. But when you centralize it in Washington, D.C., they don't really know the needs of each and every state. And so how can taking back our education, especially with the parent revolution, change our country or help our country to improve?
Yeah, and the Department of Education, it doesn't just centralize power, it wastes a lot of money. I mean, if President Trump's plan went through to fully gut the Department of Education, we'd actually have more money for education going towards the classroom. Why? Because the plan is to send education dollars back to the states. So you'd be wasting less money on useless bureaucrats pushing paper in Washington, D.C. over 1,000 miles away. You'd instead have that money directed to the classroom by the states. And you're right, Donald, you'd have more local control. The states would know their constituents better than people in D.C. who have no idea what your children need in your state. And so parents would also be more in charge as well, especially in states like Texas. If they were to choose to use some of that funding for more school choice, then parents could direct the money to the school that aligns with their values. And ultimately, this is going to save our country. Even if you don't have kids in the school system right now, maybe you don't have any kids at all. This is a fight that is very important to every American citizen, because otherwise, if you have kids going to government-run institutions controlled by radical leftists for 13 years of their lives, hearing on repeat that big government's the solution to all of their problems, well, they're going to go out and vote for big government policies that restrict individual liberties, religious liberties, and so on and so forth. They're going to vote to increase your taxes. And so school choice is one way to kind of strike at the root of the problem towards rescinding this socialist drift that is caused by the school system. I mean, you look at New York City right now, it shouldn't surprise us that Zoran Mamdani is in first place. He came out in first in the Democrat primary, even though he's a socialist. I don't know what he's doing running as a Democrat. I guess these days you don't know the difference between the two. But he has called for government control of grocery stores. I used to tell people we should have school choice, because just imagine if government was running all the grocery stores, you were assigned to them based on where you lived, and you couldn't go anywhere else, even if they poisoned you with expired food. That's the government school monopoly. But some people would tell me at the time, well, don't give them any ideas. Well, now you have the person in first place for mayor in New York City actually saying, hold my beer, I do want the government to run the grocery stores and the schools, even though he's a total hypocrite. And that's another thing here. This topic really exposes a lot of the people who are in bed with the teachers unions right now in terms of taking their campaign contributions and then doing their bidding when they're in office. They went to private schools themselves. Joe Biden sent his kids to private school. You think about Governor Gavin Newsom in California. He doesn't support school choice for other people, but he sends his kids to private school. You think about Stacey Davis Gates in Chicago. I mentioned earlier, they spend $30,000 a kid in the public schools. They're always asking for more. And 55 of their public schools have not a single kid proficient in math. They're failure factories. Stacey knows it, but she called school choice racist a couple of years ago. And then lo and behold, we find out this year that she's sending her own kid to a private school. I mean, it's school choice for me, but not for thee. Some animals are more equal than others. It's basically this form of elitism. They think they know best for their kids, but the commoners, the masses, they believe don't have the wherewithal to choose for their own children. It is a disgusting point of view. And I'd say even low-income families, they know their kids better than anybody else, certainly more than bureaucrats who don't even know their names of their children. And parents from all socioeconomic status and race and background, they care about their kids more than anybody else
Yes,
too.
they do.
So they're going to get that decision right. They don't, they're not always perfect and going to get it right 100% of the time. But you know what? The public school system doesn't get it right 100% of the time either. And the parents are in the best position to pivot to make sure that they get their kid in the right situation for them, since they have that on the ground knowledge and position to do the right thing for their kids. So this is ultimately about parental rights. And we have 100 years this year is the anniversary of the Pierce versus Society of Sisters Supreme Court decision, where the court famously ruled that, quote, the child is not the mere creature of the state. We need to get back to that and get away from this notion that they're society's kids, that the government should be in control. That is a communist ideology that is pushed by the school system. It's time to free the parents. And at the end of the day, when we free the parents to choose for their own kids, we're going to free our country too. We're going to have more liberty. We're going to have more equality of opportunity by allowing other families to have choice, not just the well-off and well-to-do who can afford to live by the best public schools, who can afford to pay twice and to pay for private school tuition like Zohar Mamdani's family did for him, and like the Chicago Teachers Union boss does for her child. I don't blame them for having those choices, but they should not pull the ladder up from behind themselves, should allow other families to do it as well. And then our country is going to be better off. Taxpayers are going to be better off. It costs less in the private sector than it does in the public schools, where we're spending $20,000 a kid now on average in America. That spending amount has increased 170% since 1970 in real terms after adjusting for inflation. The money's not going to the classroom, though. It's going towards administrative bloat. It's going towards just hiring more dues-paying members, but it's not going towards teacher salaries, and it's not going towards the kids. And so the school system has become more of a jobs program for administrators than an education initiative for kids. And when parents wake up, we're all going to be better off.
Well, you mentioned in the last segment, I do believe a lot of teachers, they get into teaching because they really want to teach our children. And by the administrative state growing exponentially more than the number of teachers as well as the number of students, you just hit the nail on the head right there. And I want to talk a little bit about homeschooling and the experience that I had with the public school with another one of my children. And my son, when he was in the 4th grade, you buy, in the public schools, they give you a list of materials they want you to send to the first day of school with your child. So I look at my son's list, and I'm looking at my wife like, why do we need to buy him all of this stuff for his first day of school? Nevertheless, we bought all of it, and
you're already
sent it to
paying
school.
taxes for it. They're spending $20,000 a kid. Where's it going?
Exactly. We paying taxes for it, and there's no way he's going to use all this stuff that they wanted. It was just way too much. We sent him to school with it, and what I found out is, going to your point on the socialism and the communism, my son would take what he needed and kept it at his desk, and the rest of it went into the community cupboard. That's covert
teaching
socialism.
And it's a microcosm, within
exactly.
the classroom.
And so you wonder why we have a generation that will vote for a Mamdani in New York. They've been teaching this. My son is 28 now, so they've been teaching this for over a generation or two to our children. So now we have a lot of children that think socialism works. It's never worked anywhere else, and it won't work here. And so with that in mind, what are some of the advantages of homeschooling? When we look at school choice, homeschooling is one of those choices, right?
Yeah, I'd say it's the purest form of school choice in a sense, because it's one-on-one, you're raising your own kid. And I will say, with the administrative blow, we have data on this actually. Since 2000, the National Center for Education Statistics has been consistently reporting this over time. And the data show, Elon Musk has actually shared some of my tweets where I've shared graphs of this because it's so mind-blowing just how the money's not making its way to the kids. And that's evident when parents are having to pay out of pocket for all of these supplies that, hey, wait a second, you already took my money through taxes and then you're just squandering it. You're basically lighting it on fire. You're not putting it into the classroom. You're enriching the adults in the system, but then the kids turn out not being able to read. But since 2000, the number of students in the public school system has basically been flat mostly because of COVID. There was a slight uptick, but then COVID. So it's been basically the same level since 2000. The number of teachers in the system has increased by about 10%, but the number of administrators in the system has increased by about 95%.
Wow.
A 95% increase in administrators. It's just an insane amount of administrative bloat. And that's what happens when you have a monopoly. When you don't have to spend that money wisely, if parents have no recourse to go somewhere else or to hold the districts accountable, what do the districts do? They build these Taj Mahal type buildings for their own staff. They hire more people, which means more dues paying members, which mean more revenues for the union bosses like Randi Weingarten and Becky Pringle to push towards politics as opposed towards classroom activities or even teacher benefits. It doesn't benefit the teachers. It doesn't benefit the kids. And so, homeschooling is another great alternative to where, the main argument you'll hear against homeschooling, you'll never hear someone say, oh, homeschooling is not going to properly educate the kids, because you see the data time and time again. There's systematic reviews by Brian Ray and others in peer-reviewed journals showing that homeschoolers knock it out of the park on academics. Like they're just doing way better than the rest of the pack. Of course, you can find examples of, there's this one public school kid that did really well compared to this homeschool kid. But on average, the homeschoolers are doing a fantastic job academically. I think it's because they have more time to focus on academics. And then two, their parents are actually having their kids focus on math, reading, and writing as opposed to the politics that gets injected to the public school system. And then all the time changing classes, getting to school, commute time, there's all that waste built into the one size fits all model. And then teaching to a large group that's just grouped together based on where they live. You're going to have high achievers, low achievers. The teacher has the hardest job in the world in the public school system. They're either going too fast for someone or too slow for someone. They're trying to teach to the middle. They typically will teach to the lowest common denominator. And then that really just holds everybody behind in the public school system, which is not the fault of the teachers. It's this, they're given this impossible task almost by grouping kids together in this way through this factory model school system that's kind of pushing kids along this conveyor belt and not really educating them all that well, especially when you have unions fighting for policies that reward failure. Basically, they fight against merit pay. They don't want any pay for performance. They protect the worst teachers in the system. And so what do the best teachers do? They say, you know what, the heck with this, I'm going to leave. I'm going to go become an engineer as opposed to a math teacher. I'm not getting rewarded for doing a good job. And so it's really set up for failure in a way because the unions fight for policies that reward failure. I mean, it's as simple as that. But homeschooling allows for parents to be in full control. You'll hear people say, I get it. Look, they have more time to focus on academics. They're not into all of the political propaganda that's pushed in the schools. So of course they're doing better on math, reading, and writing. But what about the socialization aspect of the public schools? Aren't they going to miss out? And my quick response to that is, have you seen society? If that is your form of socialization, I don't want my kid to be socialized.
Absolutely.
I mean, I went to public schools all through K through 12, and my high school was a little better. It was a magnet school, so they kind of had an incentive to cater to the needs of their customers. You're not assigned to magnet schools, even though it's still run by the government technically. But it had a specialized mission. The students wanted to be there. There wasn't this kind of huge disconnect between the levels of kind of competence of the students and where they were at with their lessons. And so it worked out a little better. But in my middle school and the school that I was assigned to for high school, there was fights, there was drugs, gang activity. People were getting pregnant. Even in middle school, the one that I went to. And so that's not, you can argue that's socialization. And, in my middle school, people were getting beat up in the bathroom and they called it getting rolled into the gang. It was a form of social status in a sense, that it was initiation into the gang. And that was seen as a good thing. I never got involved with that stuff, but people were doing drugs on the school campus. And, you know, that is a type of socialization that would be better to be avoided. And when you can homeschool, you can cut all that stuff out and you can manage positive forms of socialization for your kids. You can go to homeschool co-ops, you can get involved in community sports, and you can tailor that socialization so that you minimize the risk of negative influences while capitalizing on positive influences. And the systematic review by Brian Ray that was published in the Journal of School Choice found that homeschool kids tended to be actually better socialized than the kids in the factory model school system for all the reasons I just listed.
Right. Well, let me ask you this question, because we just said we're spending a lot of money in the public schools on children. They're spending, I don't know, 7-8 hours a day in the public school system. They're coming out, as you mentioned, one statistic, in Chicago, I think it was 55% of the children coming out below grade level, not able to read and write and do math. And when we look at homeschool, what's the average day of a homeschooler, and how much cost is it compared to the public school? Is there any data or statistics on that?
Yeah. So it depends on how the teacher or parent wants to structure it. Some people have figured out that they can still go to work and provide a homeschool type of instruction through micro schools, which are very popular now. It's kind of re-envisioning the one-room schoolhouse. I was just in Florida, in Sebring, Florida. I'd never been there before. It's about 2 hours west of Orlando, and it was a school in the middle of nature. I would call it a micro school. They call themselves a private school, but they have about 110 students, and it's K through 12. They even have early childhood on site as well. It's only about $10,000 or so per student, which is far below what the government schools are spending. And I believe all of their students there are using scholarships to pay for that tuition, but it doesn't look anything like a normal kind of brick and mortar prison type of school where people are just unhappy. They don't want to be there. In the micro school in Florida, it's like they're surrounded by nature. They have trees all around them. There's animals on the campus. And students will learn stuff in the classroom like you would see in a typical school, but then they learn about the things that they're learning. For example, they can have a physics class where they're learning the mathematical equations. Then they'll go out and build a bow and arrow and incorporate the physics that they learned in the classroom. And so it's almost like a Waldorf style type of homeschooling, but also it's in a private school setting. And so it can look a lot of different ways. And I would say it costs a lot less for homeschooling in terms of dollars. You know, like for homeschooling, you don't have to really pay tuition. You just have to pay for the supplies and the curriculum. But there is an opportunity cost. If you're homeschooling your child, you're not going to be as likely to be able to have a full-time job for the parent that's kind of taking charge of the homeschool equation. And so there's that kind of opportunity cost, even if there's not a tuition cost. So I think homeschoolers should get the money to follow the child too. So even if your tuition at the homeschool is only kind of a dollars and cents cost of, let's say, $1,000 for all the homeschooling curriculum and supplies, you should still get the same $10,000 that someone else is getting to go to a private school if you have a scholarship program. And a lot of states are already doing this. In Arizona, for example, they have education savings accounts. So their public schools spend like $15,000, $16,000 a kid in Arizona. But if you want to opt out for whatever reason, you can get a scholarship that goes into a savings account for about $8,000. And you could use that for private school tuition at a normal private school if you want. But if not, you could even homeschool, use it for curriculum. You can pay a private tutor, and you can have that same dollar amount that you would have used at a private school. And so I think homeschooling is the way to go personally, but I know it is very difficult for a lot of families to figure out how to juggle all these things. And so but I will say school choice only makes it easier. It makes it more likely that you'll be able to exercise that choice. But I'm not here to say that that's the best option for everybody, right? Like if the private school is good for you, if there's a religious education that you're really in tune with, you need to have that choice. If the public school is providing what's working for your kid, more power to you. But I will say, I do think the public school system discriminates against religious families in particular. And I'd almost say it's unconstitutional that we're forced to pay for the system that we're compelled to attend through compulsory education laws, in a sense, compelled to pay for through taxes. And then they say that they cannot be religious. And, if you're a religious family and you want to direct the upbringing of your child in that way, you can make the argument that that's directly in conflict with you being a religious person. And so I think the only remedy is school choice, to allow people to choose what works best for them so that we can live in peace, live in harmony, and not force our values on anybody else, because that's what the school system is doing today. It's forcing the teachers union's ideology on everybody else's families, everybody else's kids. And, I'm not here to say that the union shouldn't have their ideology and that people who support the unions shouldn't think that way. If that's how you think, I'm not here to say that, you can't have that kind of education, but you shouldn't trap my kids in that system either. And I should be able to raise my children how I want to raise them. And school choice is one way to get there.
Well, that's going to circle back to how we started this segment, and education and how it can help our country, right? Getting our kids properly educated. And it was John Quincy Adams, going to your point about discriminating against religious kids or Christians. He said, our Constitution and our form of government is for a moral and religious people, and is wholly fit for no other. And so going to your point on the homeschooling, and if you're a Christian family, you get to instill these values that will actually, which our Constitution is actually designed around, because you can only have our form of government under a self-governing people. And education has to include the religious aspect of it, or the God aspect, and that's what our founders said, actually.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, in 1642, that was the first compulsory education law that went on the books in the colonies in Massachusetts. It was actually called the Old Deluder Satan Act, and it was to have a religious education so that everybody could get into heaven, to be able to read the Bible, basically. And so we've gotten so far away from, it's almost like the public school system had a stated purpose of creating a more cohesive society, creating good American citizens. And it's kind of been flipped on its head to where you have these political ideologies in the classroom, ripping people apart, dividing people based on immutable characteristics into classes of oppressors, classes of the oppressed. And I'd say that's ripping our society to get apart. It's not mending it and putting it together. And so I do think a religious education, it almost can't be disentangled. I see the education of children as basically an extension of parenting. And with the private setting, at least you get to pick kind of who you're going to have help you with the upbringing of your child. You're ultimately in charge of what that community is going to look like. But in the public school system, so many parents just don't have any power. And when parents try to say, hey, you know what, these are my kids, I think this, that, or the other should happen so that they can be raised, the right way that's aligned with my family's values. So many of the school boards don't want to hear it. And so they'll turn off comments on social media. I'm experiencing that right now with the unions in Virginia. They endorsed a guy named Jay Jones who fantasized about shooting his political opponent. The text messages just came out, and he wished death upon his political opponent's children so that he could change his views politically. He said that that some people only change their policy views if they feel pain personally. And he used the example of his children dying in their mother's arms as a way to get this guy to change his political views. I mean, that is just as disgusting as you can get. And what did the Virginia Education Association do? They endorsed him, and when called out about it, refused to pull the endorsement. I've emailed everybody on their team and their executive director. When I asked for a statement, they responded with their email signature, basically telling me, we're not going to give you a statement. Our statement is nothing. We're going to continue forward. We're going to turn off our Facebook replies, our Twitter replies. They blocked me on both social media platforms. But that just really goes to show you that you have people in charge of these unions that see the school system as a way not to push a religious education, to push an anti-religious education,
Yes.
an anti-Christian education, and to replace it with their socialist worldview, with their, because otherwise it would just be focused on math, reading, and writing. But they have replaced religion to get people to worship the altar of woke ideology, their far left progressive agenda. And that's not going to end well for this country. And the unions are spearheading the effort. Why were they even involved in an attorney general's race to begin with? And why won't they rescind their endorsement? And why, when asked about it by Virginia parents, are they turning off their comments and replies? It reminds me, just like the school boards, that during COVID, when parents weren't happy about it, they didn't listen to those parents. They only want to hear from you if you agree with them. And that's a big problem. It's a flaw in their school board model of so-called democratic accountability. It all broke down during COVID, and parents are the true form of accountability. They need to be able to vote with their feet. School choice empowers them to do so. And at the end of the day, teachers have power too. If you don't like the Education Association misrepresenting your values and endorsing people who fantasize about murdering children, you can opt out of that union, keep your money, and be protected with personal liability insurance from groups like the Teacher Freedom Alliance. There's no reason why teachers should continue funding this madness. They have the power too, not just the parents.
Well, I agree. They need to opt out if they're not representing their values. Corey, this has been really good. I am excited about people seeing this, and what I want to talk to them about, because it sounds like they need a continued parent revolution in Virginia when it comes to the attorney general race, because that is not who you want to be your top lawmaker, someone that wants fantasizing about killing their opponent and their children. That is because in reality, if they are fantasizing about their opponent that way, they certainly can do the same thing with the constituencies and they should not be electing someone that is projecting that kind of evil. And so how can people find your book, and how can they find you either online, or if you have a website, can you give our audience that information?
Yeah, you can follow me on X. It's at DeAngelis Corey. And then if you want to get the book, it's called The Parent Revolution. I'm serious. Randi Weingarten copied the cover. I think it's because I dedicated my book to her for inadvertently doing more to advance school choice and homeschooling than anyone could have ever imagined.
Excellent.
Because they've made a complete fool of themselves during COVID. Woke up parents. We need to continue the revolution. It's on Amazon. It's, I think, 40% off right now. It's a bestseller. Trump endorsed it. Get it while it's hot. The Parent Revolution. And thanks so much, Donald and Cure America, for having me discuss this important topic today.
Well, thank you again, Corey, for being with us. That's The Parent Revolution by Corey DeAngelis. I recommend that you get a copy of that book so that you as a parent can learn what you can do to take control of your children's life, their education. Thank you again, Corey. And we have been here with Cure America, and we'll see you next time. God bless you.